Hi readers, welcome back to my channel, Lila Wanders and Reads. Lee here, and welcome to my first Booker Prize Project episode. I'm committing now. I hadn't been willing to commit earlier this year or late last year, but I had been thinking about it and gathering the books, and I've decided to do a project where I read the Booker Prize winning novels from the most recent one to the last one. And what made me decide to do that is a Booker Prize project I did last year, in which I read several, probably about half a dozen of the Booker long list books for 2024, and I really enjoyed that. At least 3 books I really connected with, and it stretched me as a reader. And so I decided to embark on this project. So, what I intend to do starting now is do a review on the Booker book that I've read and then move on at some point to the next. But what is the Booker Prize? It's a prize given for the best single work of sustained fiction written in English and published in the UK and Ireland. The winning book is a work that not only speaks to our current times, but also one that will endure and join the pantheon of great literature. And on each review, I'm going to try to talk about whether that last part resonates with me for the book that was chosen. From 1969, which was the inaugural prize, to 2001, it was known as the Booker Prize for Fiction. From 2002 to 2019, the Man Booker Prize. Now it's just called the Booker Prize. And originally, it was only open to authors to citizens of the Commonwealth, Ireland, and South Africa. I fucked that up. Anyway, but in 2014, it expanded to any English language novel, and apparently that was very shocking to some. Anywho, so I soft-started this project last year, and I read Orbital, and I did not at the time do a standalone book review on this because I hadn't thought about how I was going to approach this project yet. And this was not my favorite of the Booker books that I read last year. She does a lot of listing. I felt like it was lyrical, but it didn't resonate with me the way that some of the other books read. So I approached the inaugural prize winner, P.H. Newby's Something to Answer For, quite differently. For one, and this is what I will do moving forward with the Booker books, because I'm not worried about spoilers. I think most of them don't have a twist. It's not a mystery contest. So I read reviews of Something to Answer For. I read YouTube reviews of this, and I looked up articles online about it. I would love to have found some of the original reviews of this, because on the front, The Guardian calls it beautifully written, shot through with crisp, mordant wit. But I didn't find any of those. What I also did when I was looking up this book is, based on a suggestion of another YouTuber, I went and read up on the history of the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. I really worked to read this book. I prepped for it, and so moving forward, I'm going to do that as well with the other books. But had I not done the prep work on this book, I would have been lost in the sauce, and it would have gone way over my head. As it is, it probably went over my head anyway. Let's see what it's about. It's 1956, and Town Row is in Port Said. Of these 2 facts, he's reasonably certain. He has been summoned by the widow of his deceased friend Eli Corey. She's convinced that Eli was murdered, and nobody seems to agree with her. What about Leah Strauss, the mistress, the invading British paratroops? Only an Englishman surely would take for granted that the British have behaved themselves. In this disorientating world, Townrow must assess the rules by which he has been living his life, to wonder whether he, too, may have something to answer for. What you learn about early on is that Townrow is admittedly kind of a crook. He's embezzling funds from his job. His intent when he comes to South Africa is to get, to Port Said, is to get the widow to turn over all her assets to him and put it in his name so he can steal them from her. But the story is not that straightforward. I said I had to work to read this. I worked to prep for it, and it was work to read it. And had I not approached the project this way, I would have probably quit 3/4 of the way through. But for two things. One, I wanted to finish it. And two, one thing that PH Newby does really well is setting the scene. I felt like I was with Townrow every place that he was. And he was a lot of places. In space, in time. Half the time, I did not know what the fuck was going on. So, just one funny here. His name is Townrow. Townrow. And every time I read his name in the book, my brain registered tomorrow. I had to stop and correct it. Which probably was part of the work that my brain had to do. But I want to stop a minute and talk about some other prep work that I did. Like I said, based on another YouTuber's recommendation, I did some digging into the Suez Canal crisis of 1956, which was not on my radar. But, and this is not a history lesson. So I watched videos about that. I listened to a podcast about that. I went through the timeline, which I'll go into a little bit here. So, Suez Canal crisis of 1956. Basically, kind of marked the end of Britain's influence in the world as a major force. So June 1956, Gamal Nasser becomes president of Egypt. In July, he nationalizes the Suez Canal, which had previously, I guess, been international. So Britain, France, and Ireland conspired to take the canal back, I guess. So in October, Israel invades Egypt. And then that's October 29th. October 30th, Britain and France demand a ceasefire, but it's all a ruse. So apparently, on this one podcast, I heard the author of the book she wrote about the canal, is that Anthony Eden wanted Nasser murdered even before he nationalized the canal. So I guess I'm not sure what was going on there. Anyway, the Britain and France demanded a ceasefire. It was all a ruse. The UN followed suit the next day, or a couple days later. And then on November 5th, my birthday, I was not born in 1956, but Britain and France land in Port Said and Port Fouad. But the U.S. was not having any of this. They pressured the British and the French to accept a ceasefire, and eventually they evacuate, and then later Israel evacuates, later that next year. So that's a mini version. But one other YouTuber suggested that these characters in here, there's an American in here, American Jew. There are a lot of Greeks in here, and that part escaped me. I don't really understand that part of it. Townrow, of course, is British. The wife is British, but she was married to a Lebanese man who lived in Egypt. They were both Egyptian citizens. So, like I said, the YouTuber suggested you look at these characters as representatives of their countries. And that was a way that helped me understand this, because the storytelling in and of itself is when I said I don't know what the fuck was going on, how do you dream? I dream a lot of times. A lot of times I'm dream like I'm trying to get somewhere, and it will jump from scene to scene in my dream with no, just like a break, like a bad edit. And that's what sometimes this was. You'll be in one place and then the very next scene, no tie-in, just whoop, all of a sudden you're somewhere else. And about 3/4 of the way, you see when I stopped tabbing, actually, yeah, that is probably when I started to get a little bit frustrated and I just had to push through because I just was lost in the sauce. I knew what was going on, but it was very jumpy. And at the end, you're not sure what really happened, except that this seems to be a statement on Britain and their loss of influence in the world and their need for the U.S., because it was the United States and Eisenhower's pressure that finally made Britain and France give up. So, it's funny, right after this, I DNF'd 2 modern books, and I did not DNF this. Again, one for the project, but also I will have already talked about those 2 books and why I DNF'd them in my weekend books. I don't think I would have DNF'd this if I had read this in 1969 when this was written. It was published in 1968, I think. Yeah, 1969 is when it won the prize. I think I would have understood more about world events, and if I had been a British citizen, I certainly probably would have gotten along with this a lot better. So there's a language barrier. I use that with air quotes because I am not a Briton in the 1950s or 60s. This is a generation before me. I did not know anything about the Suez Canal, and that's why I'm so glad that that person did, that I had done the prep work and realized I needed to bone up on the history. Otherwise, I would not have had any clue about what this meant. Now, so does it speak to its current time? I believe so. I think 1969 was a lot closer to 1956 and the World War, because you have to have known about the World Wars to understand the crisis as well, and the setting up of the Israeli state and all that. I don't have a deep knowledge of them, just a surface knowledge. I think if I were to go back and reread this, and I won't, I would have a better time now that I understand the flow of his writing and where it's all going. I had one more thing to say, and I think I've lost it. Oh, yeah. Will it endure and join the pantheon of great literature? For a long time, I believe. This was out of print. That's what I've heard other people say. This paperback edition was first published in 2018. So I don't know how long it was out of print, or if that's even true. I don't know that it will join the great pantheon of literature. I mean, obviously, it's going to be remembered forever by people who follow the Booker Prize or literature prizes. What is important to me in this is that I learned something about history. And the whole title, Something to Answer For, alludes to the fact that Townrow and Britain had something to answer for with this whole conspiracy that they did to invade a sovereign nation on false pretenses. So, I enjoyed this book for the most part. I got frustrated when I was a little bit, like I said, about 3/4 of the way through, but I finished it in 2 days. I really pushed myself to finish it, and I'm glad that I read it, if only for the fact that I learned some history that I did not previously know. So, that is it for my first Booker Prize project video. Sorry, the sun just changed the lighting. Oh well. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, or about the Suez Canal crisis of 1956. If you have thoughts on Orbital, I'd love to hear your thoughts on those. This was, again, not my least favorite, but I really wish I had prepared more for Orbital the way I did for P.H. Newby. I don't have to prepare more on the history side because I'm living in this year. Now I think about last year's winter prophet song, and I can't wait to get to that. So if I didn't say this at first, the way I will do this is I will read, well, technically I started with 2024, and then I read 1969. Next up will be Prophet Song from 2023. And then I cannot remember off the top of my head what the second winner is. I think the second one is what's called the Lost Booker Prize, but I'll get back to you when I read that. So I'm not going to read these back to back to back. I've got to have some difference in there. I can't do all this work, so I haven't decided if it'll be once every couple of weeks or once a month, but I do plan to continue on with this because now I'm having fun and I'm learning stuff, and I think I'm stretching myself as a reader. That is it for me. Thank you so much for sticking with me on this journey. Happy reading.